Alright guys, in today's video we have some pretty important information to go over and talk about here in regards to the next generation consoles as well as upcoming games from both Sony and Microsoft. Both Sony and Microsoft have come out and issued multiple statements in regards to both the next generation consoles as well as their games, and letting us know whether or not there are any issues occurring right now and whether or not we can anticipate delays for either the console or upcoming titles. Now, I will tell you right off the bat, when it comes to the next generation consoles, it seems like things are looking pretty good. However, when it comes to the games themselves, it looks like we could be running into some potential problems, some potential delays. While this isn't the exciting news that all of us were hoping to have by now, it is just the reality of the situation. I'm sure all of you are well aware of what's going on in the world right now and how it's affecting pretty much everybody and every single company, and gaming is obviously not immune to this. So I wanted to provide this information to you guys and keep you guys up to date. So if you could do me a favor, even though it's not the most exciting news, hit the like button to help the video out, and make sure you hit the subscribe button as well so you don't miss any future content. And I also want to let you know really quick that later on here on the channel, I plan to stream myself playing Predator Hunting Grounds. So if you want to come hang out with me while I do that, feel free to do so. They're doing a free trial weekend for PS4 and PC players. So yeah, that's something I plan on doing. If you want to be notified as soon as I go live, I don't have an exact time yet, hit the bell notification icon and I hope to see you there. But getting into it here, we're going to go over the statement that Sony issued first when it comes to the PlayStation 5 specifically. It says here that extracted from business outlet Bloomberg, the online publication said that it had been in contact with a Sony spokesperson and stated the following. A Sony spokeswoman said it doesn't see any notable impact on the launch of its next generation game console, PlayStation 5, planned at the end of this year. So it's a short but sweet and to the point statement that basically confirms that as of right now, Sony doesn't see any issues with the PlayStation 5. They didn't even mention anything about potential supply constraint or quantity issues. And this is a good thing because that's something a lot of people are concerned about. And there could still be issues going forward. But as of right now, the PS5 seems to be on track. And so I'm happy about that, as I'm sure many of you are as well. But on top of that, we have a statement that was issued by Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. This is what he told CNBC. On the supply side, we are getting back on rails. We'll have to check back on it, but the one good thing is the supply chains are all coming back in some sense right now. That is not a real issue. I think the bigger issue is what happens in the United States, in Europe, and other developing markets around the demand side of this going forward. So yeah, it seems like what Satya Nadella is saying here, and this does pertain to the next generation Xbox consoles, that it's a matter of whether or not there's going to be a lot of demand based off of everything that's happening. Things are coming back online where a lot of things are produced in China. So because of that, it doesn't seem like the Xbox Series is going to suffer any delays, but it's going to be a real interesting scenario to see how much demand there is. And, it talks about developing markets. They're concerned about the US and Europe. And so, yeah, it's not great news, but it's essentially, getting down to the point here when it comes to both of these consoles. Both Sony and Microsoft have issued statements, and they're saying that when it comes to supply, yeah, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay in manufacturing these consoles, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be any delay, but there could be other issues in other areas when it comes to these consoles. So, good news, I'd say, but now we have to move on to talking about the games specifically, and unfortunately, this is where things get a little bit murkier and maybe not so good for both Sony and Microsoft when it comes to games. And so we're going to go over the statement that Sony has issued. First, it says, in a new statement issued on the official Sony website, the company said, although no issues have emerged so far, Sony is carefully monitoring the risk of delays in production schedules for game software titles at both its first-party studios and partner studios, primarily in Europe and the US. It also doesn't expect the virus to have any material impact on the business for this current fiscal year. So there's good and bad here. The good is that basically what this statement is saying is that as of right now, things are on track when it comes to the games for both first party and their partner studios. But the statement makes it very clear that things could change and that Sony is monitoring this very carefully. And this is really a situation where they might not be able to do anything about it. If The Last of Us Part 2 simply isn't ready to go because they're working from home, and obviously there's a lot still to be done, and there's always a lot of work going into this, at the end of a development cycle. If they can't have it ready, then they're just going to have to delay it. You also have to think about like production as well, right? Like physical copies of the game. We know that this is something that a lot of publishers are issuing warnings about, where like I think most recently it was for Resident Evil 3 Remake as well as Final Fantasy 7 Remake. They're coming out here and letting gamers know and letting people know, look, like you can still order these games physically, but they might not arrive on time, and they probably don't have an actual estimate of when they're going to arrive. Luckily, there is digital, and that is something that a lot of people can take solace in, but not everybody's going to be able to get their games digitally, and you have to imagine that this is having a negative impact in general, because even though a lot of people do buy their games digitally, there's still a lot of people who do buy their games physically, and because of this, this could end up negatively impacting sales some way. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we don't see games like The Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima getting delayed. I think Ghost of Tsushima has a little bit more breathing room because it's not releasing until basically, the end of June and the beginning of July, and so maybe by that time everything will be looking better than it does look now, hopefully, being optimistic. But you definitely have to look at The Last of Us Part 2 and think, man, like, it's coming out at the end of May. How is development being impacted? We don't know. We really don't know. But if things get any worse, I'm sure Sony is going to have to say something about it, or Naughty Dog is going to have to issue a statement. So I don't want to be pessimistic and say, oh yeah, the game's going to get delayed. I want to say as of right now, it's probably not going to. But at the same time, we do have to understand that things are changing on a daily basis, and that we could see a situation where The Last of Us Part 2 ends up getting delayed. I don't know what that will mean for the game. Specifically, I don't know what that will mean for Ghost of Tsushima, what it will mean for the PS5. I mean, it's a really strange situation and a developing situation. So finally, I'm going to end this video by talking about what Microsoft's Matt Booty had to say when it comes to their first-party games and their first-party studios. And it's kind of a very similar situation here where it's kind of ambiguous. They're not really saying definitively that anything's going to get delayed, but it does seem like there's a chance that, maybe like Halo Infinite, for example, could end up suffering a delay. So this is exactly what Matt Booty had to say. And he's the head of Microsoft's Game Studios first party. He said, "We know that gaming connects people during times of social distancing, and we are committed to delivering the highest quality Xbox Game Studios games for our global community of players. At the same time, the health and safety of our Xbox Game Studios development teams is our top priority. Each studio is facing unique challenges and constraints depending on its particular location, and many of our external development partners around the world are similarly affected. We are supporting our studio leaders to make the right decisions for their teams and their individual games during this challenging time." Now, I think that statement is a little bit more telling than what Sony had to say, because Sony just basically said that there's no issues now, but we're monitoring the situation. Matt Booty's basically saying that they're leaving it up to their teams, and it almost really, if you read this last part of the statement here where it says that they're supporting the studio leaders to make the right decisions, and specifically, with their individual games, it sounds like, the studios may end up coming forward and being like, look, given the circumstances, under these working conditions, we're not going to be able to have this game out, by the time the next generation Xbox is out, talking about Halo Infinite. And that would be huge. Like, that would be a huge blow to Microsoft if that ends up happening. Of course, they can't put out a broken game or a game that's just not ready, an undercooked game. They have to give it the time it needs. Same goes for Sony. And something interesting that's worth noting here is you assume that when Matt Booty talks about these games, they're implying upcoming games for next generation. And Sony, with the statement they issued, they're also talking about next generation games as well. They do mention first party studios and their partners, and they don't directly reference the PS5, but this is definitely affecting upcoming PS5 game development as well. And the good news is Sony hasn't announced any games other than Godfall for PS5, and this may actually help them out because if they're having any issues behind the scenes, none of it has to be made public, whereas with Microsoft, they talked about Halo Infinite, and that's a big game that a lot of people are really looking forward to. That's probably a big reason why a lot of people are going to want to, buy the console day one. So hopefully they don't suffer any issues or any delays. But that's pretty much going to do it for the video, guys. I wanted to provide this update for you because it's a pretty important one, as I said. Not the most exciting news, but we have to pay attention to this stuff. For those of us who are passionate about gaming and excited about what's coming up, we have to pay attention to, how these timelines are looking and how they're going to be affected. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to leave your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think about all of this information we went over today? Be sure to leave the video a like if you enjoyed it or found it informative. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.